Let's dive in this morning. This morning is a little different than normal. This Christmas season, we've mixed it up a little bit. We normally here at our church teach through whole books of the Bible, verse by verse. And if that's what you're here for, this is going to be a little bit different. So you'll have to come back after Christmas, and we'll get back into that. But what we're doing this morning is this synthesis of science and technology and art and bringing all these things together, because God is more than just in the Bible. God is all over we looked at here 2 weeks ago when you introduced this, across the heavens, across the stars. We look up in the sky, and I hope you see it. I hope you see the wonder of this creation. This morning, we're going to look at the nature of humanity and looking at the innermost parts of how people work and how it reveals a designer. And so art is one of these things that it crosses over the difference between the mundane and the sacred. And we talk about that with visual arts, with painting and the creation. But it's also in the design of how things are made. And so just a little bit of reminder, this is what we concluded with last time, was to open your eyes to see the Creator. Because we all have a choice. We can get so focused on the here and nows, the day-to-day living of the jobs and getting home and doing the chores, and we can not open our eyes, right? Stop and smell the roses. Well, stop and open your eyes and see where God is at work in this universe. And I know that this is not a novel idea. You've probably heard this idea before of, hey, look around, look at the creation. In fact, the truth is that most of the things that I get up here and share with you are kind of old news. The latest and greatest novel ideas are great for business. Science is interested in the latest and greatest whatever. They're looking for the newest thing, and we're bombarded constantly by the latest and greatest iPhone sale. Everyone wants the new stuff, right? I have an old thing for you, okay? And when it comes to theology, I think sometimes the older things are better. Okay, and so this morning's thought is a little bit of an old one. Even the ancient non-Christians recognized this. A very famous statesman and philosopher from the Roman era, 100 years before Jesus, Marcus Cicero, said, "But can there be any person who can consider the regular movements of the heavenly bodies, the prescribed courses of the stars, and how it is all linked and bound into a single system, and then deny that there is any conscious purpose, and to say that this is all a work of chance?" Now, he wasn't attributing any of that stuff to the God of the Bible, okay? That was not what he was thinking at all. But what he's saying here is that there's a reason for it. And he didn't have what the reason was, and he probably believed in the Roman pantheon of gods of Zeus and Saturn, all these kind of crazy things. But he recognized it wasn't chance. And these days, I find there's a lot of folks who think it is chance, right? You run across those. But I find even more so that less and less people are really subscribing to the whole chance thing. I think a lot more folks are starting to come up with different ideas. In fact, I think one of the more popular ones these days that's kind of hip and cool is the whole simulation hypothesis, that you're all just playing a big video game and we're all AI agents in some big game. That's what all the many famous scientists and the folks like Elon Musk, that's what they think, right? We're in a big simulation. And this morning we're actually not even going to talk about that. I mean, that's an interesting thought. But there's an older argument about this world, about the nature of our existence, that I think is more interesting and more relevant to us here this morning. And it has to do with this design of humanity, how people are made, right? If you look at life in general, all life here on earth, and in particular, if you look at humanity, there's something unique and interesting about it. It's rather amazing, and it appears to be designed. It appears there's intent behind it, and we've noticed this for hundreds of years. This is a book by Dr. William Paley in 1802, and it's an amazing book, about 350 pages of descriptions of things in the natural world that point to God because of the nature of how they work, how they fit together. And the full title says The Natural Theology, or the Evidences of the Existence and the Attributes of the Deity Collected from the Appearances of Nature. And he goes into all these details, and the book is quite famous. You've probably heard of the opening arguments of it, and if not, let me share them with you and help us think about this old idea. So this is how the book starts off. It says, suppose I pitch my foot against a stone and were asked about how the stone came to be there. I might possibly answer that against anything that I knew to the contrary, it had lain there forever, nor would it have perhaps been very easy to show the absurdity of this answer. And again, there's a couple 100-year-old English, so it feels a little rough, but this is what he's saying, is that you're outside walking down the trail because you live here in the Northwest, and so you're out hiking, and you stub your foot on a big rock, okay? And what happens when you stub your foot in the rock? You exclaim, who put this rock there, okay? And the answer is, well, that's kind of a dumb question. Like, the rock could just be there. Like, no one had to put it there in front of you. Of course, our narcissist friend, would want to say, well, of course someone put the rock there to trip me. Like, we can make it all about ourselves. We can think about things in that paradigm. But the reality is, it was just there, okay? That was just the natural formation. Whatever glacier left it there, that's where it was. Okay, and so that's one way we observe in reality, but his argument goes on like this. He says, but suppose I found a watch upon the ground, and it should be inquired how the watch happened to be in that place. I could hardly think of the answer which I'd given before, that if for anything I knew, the watch might have always been there. Yet why should not this answer serve as well for the watch as well as the stone? I hope you understand what he's asking here. Is basically you're walking in that trail again, and you look down, you see a watch. And again, 200 years ago, it was probably a pocket watch. These days, you might be excited if it was a Rolex or something like that, or an Apple Watch or something like that. That's, and again, our narcissistic friend might be thinking like, hey, look, someone left a watch for me. But the reality is, what do we really, we recognize that, yes, someone dropped the watch, okay? Or there's a reason it's there. It's not just random chance. Like, none of us are thinking like, look, it's a naturally occurring watch in its natural habitat. Like that's not, like, it's obvious, right? That's obvious to us. But the question is, why is that obvious? Why do we recognize that the rock is supposed to be there and the watch is not natural? And the answer is, if we think about it a little bit, is one is a machine that has intelligence, it's been designed, it's out of place. And the one is naturally occurring, okay? And that's kind of the big question I want to explore this morning in a little bit of detail, in a way that we probably don't normally do, but this is the question we want to talk about, is humanity more like the rock, or is humanity more like a watch when we discover it on the trail here, okay? So this is the question I want to look at this morning, and there's many people that say humanity is just the result of natural processes, that's how it happened. It's just this is what naturally would occur. There's other folks who would say, no, there's a designer there. And I think most of us are somewhat familiar with the Bible's teaching on the subject, just as way of reminder, just to make sure you know what the Bible teaches about. Genesis 1-2 talks about it all over the place. The Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living person. That God was involved in the creation of mankind. Genesis 1, similarly, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. This is that people were created by God, male and female. It's made after God's image. And again, this doesn't exactly specify exactly what this image is. And what the details aren't there yet, but we know that there's males and females, and God did that. And of course, we live in a day and age where like male and female, are we allowed to talk about that anymore? Like there's some contention. This whole concept, there's confusion. It's so fascinating, and this is a tiny little bit of a rabbit trail here. But if you will give me just a little bit of a rabbit trail, this idea, our culture has a problem. And the problem is not necessarily with the concept of male and female. We have a problem with truth here in our culture. And this is my warning message to you as you engage in the world around you, is that our culture has begun to treat subjective opinion and objective truth as equal. Okay, our culture, we've begun to treat subjective opinion and objective truth as equal. And to explain this, we need to visualize your Christmas dinner. So put yourself into your future, wherever your holiday dinner is going to look like, whatever, maybe more cake. I don't know what your dinner looks like, but put yourself at your Christmas dinner. You have some loved ones there, and someone's going to ask, at least this is what it seems like in some of the families that I've been a part of, someone's going to ask like, hey, am I fat or skinny? Or like, did I eat too much? Or can I eat some more of this? Or, can I have my third serving of apple pie? Or wherever the case may be. And so we ask this question, and this is a dangerous question, okay? I hope you all know that. This is a dangerous question. And the reason why it's such a dangerous question is because there's not an objective answer, because it's not an objective question, right? Depending on the culture you live in, being larger could be a good thing. If you go back a couple hundred years here in the United States, I'd be considered, good looking because of having a little extra here. Nowadays, not so much, right? It's culturally defined. There's tribes in Africa that have like a festival of like getting fat so they can find their spouses because they need to look fat in order to get a spouse. It's culturally defined. Not everyone thinks the skinny jeans are the way, but it's culturally defined, and so it's a subjective question. Hey, what do you think? Right? For something not to be subjective, there's two essential ingredients. Okay, so subjective truth it's opinion, it's a perspective. Objective truth is either dependent on one of two things: either a standard that you can compare to, or it's something that's inherently objective. Let me give you a couple examples of this. So in this little ultimate holiday question day, according to the American Medical Association, my BMI, my body mass index, is considered overweight. And that's objectively true, okay? If you go look at the charts, if you find my weight on the chart, it says, hey, I'm overweight. And I can decide I don't like that fact, but there's a standard, and I know what my number is, and so it's objective. It's objectively true that, hey, I'm overweight, okay? Because there's a standard. It's also, some things are just inherently objective, like when you measure things. I stepped onto the scale this morning, and I'm a little embarrassed to say that I weighed 199 pounds. I cannot like the fact that I weigh 199 pounds, but I do. Like, if you go stand on the scale, it said the number. It's objective. And that's the nature of objective truth, is that it's consistent. It's always that way. Whereas, my spouse could say, hey, I think you're skinny, which I would love when she says, hey, I think she's skinny, but I don't think that's the case. But it's okay for us not to agree because it's subjective, right? And you don't have to agree with everyone's subjective opinion, okay? Know that other people don't need to agree with your subjective opinion. Those are opinions. They're supposed to be different, okay? The problem is that when we try to do something like this, when I say, hey, I weigh 175 pounds in my mind, and the nurse who weighed me says I weigh 109 pounds, I think we're both right. Like, wait, you can't do that, right? That's objectively false. You can't just get to decide something that's objectively true and then make it not. It's inconsistent, okay? And our culture, we're trying to do exactly that. Well, you're saying this, but it's just not true for me. And it's because we are equating subjective opinion and objective truth, and we're treating them as if they're equal. And here's again, a not so popular perspective, but this is objectively true, that biological sex is not subjective, right? It's an objective fact. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but I could do a blood test. You could poke your finger here, and we could tell you whether, it doesn't matter how you dress. It didn't matter how much surgery you've had or whatever. Like, you could know if you're male or female. It's written right into your DNA. These are a series of images from the Wisconsin State Laboratory of Hygiene. They very, very common test that's done all the time. It's called a karyogram. In fact, in the old days, DNA testing, this was actually what was done, is there would be a blood sample, and they would stop the division of the cell in the stage of mitosis, a metaphase, where the chromosomes are most lumped together like this, and you'd be able to arrange them. And when you arrange human Chromosomes, they get into a pattern like this, from largest to smallest. There's something magical about that, but this is how it's done. And you, like a fingerprint, each of the lines are unique by the person. So you can compare, like, hey, is that person different than this person? Yes or no. But you have 22 pairs of chromosomes, and then you have a 23rd, either a mismatched pair, like this guy who has an X and a Y, or you can, which this means you're a male, or you can have a pair of X's, which makes you a female. And everyone, you can go poke your finger and do a little test, and you can know it's objectively you either have two X chromosomes or you have an XY. And you can, again, it doesn't matter what you look like, but that is the biology of it. Like, it's objective, okay? And so you can pull up an unknown person. Hey, I don't know who this is. Well, you can know it's a guy because, hey, there's an X and a Y. And that's how reality works, right? And so you ask yourself a question like, hey, is there any exceptions to this? Is this always the case? And of course there's exceptions, right? There's genetics. We're people. It's messy. But here's how exceptions kind of work. So let's talk them out a little bit. The first exception I want to show you about is this dude here. If you did a karyogram, this is the person who has 3 chromosomes of number 21, called trisomy 21. It's the cause of Down syndrome. And this is what happens, and about 95% of the time when you have this third chromosome there, you have Down syndrome, and they know what causes it. Back when you were a sperm or egg, or your very first cell, there's a mistake in the cell division, and this happens. And it doesn't happen very often, but it happens, right? And you all know what that looks like, and so that's an example of that. But that's not the only kind of cellular or genetic disorder there is. There's many of them. Another example of it is one that's related to gender and sex, is this one. It's called Klinefelter syndrome, which has, it's a guy who has 2 X's and a Y. So he has 3 instead of, I said originally, right, you had 2, one or the other. And so this poor guy is a little bit different, right? And again, what's fascinating about this is there's a number of these diseases that are studied. In every single case, they could actually tell you if he was a guy or a girl and where in the process it happened. Like in this stage of the thing, this is what caused, like we actually know the sources of all these diseases. And so, but the interesting thing is in our culture, we talk a lot about sex and gender, and I wonder sometimes, like, hey, is this the cause of these issues? Like, is this the source of these things? And if you look at the stats, you'll decide that's not the case, right? This is from Brown University researcher Anne Fresto Serling, who researches these things, says the incident rate, or the frequency of this, of non-XX or XY births, is about 1 in 1,600 births, or 0.06%. Whereas Down syndrome, which you're a little more familiar with, happens in about 1 of 700 babies. So here in Thurston County, we had about 3,000 births last year. Statistically speaking, we should have had 4 or 5 Down syndrome babies, and we should have had 1 or 2 intersex babies. So this is not the issue that our culture is dealing with. It's a little bit different. I would advocate that we should create laws protecting these folks, whether you're Down syndrome or intersex or whatever. Like, yeah, we should be protecting these folks for sure, because they're dealing with issues. But what our culture is dealing with is not this, right? We're dealing with the loss of truth in general. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the meaning of male and female, the meaning of humanity, what you're made of, right? And we are made of DNA. And most of us have had a little bit of high school biology. We understand, hey, there's this molecule inside of us that's DNA. Do you know we really only first observed it visibly in 2012? Just a couple years ago. This is the first photo of DNA. You know, we learned a lot of it from just doing other science, but the first actual observation of it was in 2012. Not the greatest photo, if you ask me. I can kind of see it because I know what I'm looking for, but it's kind of hard. Okay, so it's hard to see, and the truth is there's a lot of things about how your body works that are almost impossible to see. And so we don't really understand it. We know that we know we have cells, we know we have DNA, we know these things are happening, but we've come to understand a lot of things since you were last in biology and when your biology books were written. So this morning I want to give you a little bit of a sneak peek of what's happening inside you, how you work, so to speak, to try to answer this question if we're closer to a rock or closer to a watch. So I have a couple little video clips I want to show you. So here's the first one. Let's dim the lights a little bit. Let me show you this here.
Of the actual DNA replication machine that's occurring right now inside your body, at least 2002 biology. So DNA is entering the production line from the left-hand side, and it hits this collection, this miniature biochemical machines that are pulling apart the DNA strand and making an exact copy. So DNA comes in and hits this blue donut-shaped structure, and it's ripped apart into its two strands. One strand can be copied directly, and it can be seen spooling off down to the bottom there. But things aren't so simple for the other strand because it must be copied backwards. So it's thrown out repeatedly in these loops and copied one section at a time, creating two new DNA molecules. Now, you have billions of this machine right now whirring away inside you, copying your DNA with exquisite fidelity. It's an accurate representation, and it's pretty much at the correct speed for what it's occurring inside you. But I've left out error correction and a bunch of other things.
Okay, so there is a visual representation of how your body duplicates its DNA in every single cell of your body, okay? It's kind of like a machine, okay? It attaches, it clones, it has a whole little process, and as you study these things, it's a replicating machine. And the person who's making this video, this animation, I have a couple more, he's interested in science communication. He's not trying to convince anyone of any theology, but he describes it as a machine because that's what it looks like, right? And I don't know if you understand what DNA is exactly, but DNA is this cell that's inside of us, a molecule that's inside of us that encodes information. If you put it up on a shelf, it'd be 120 volumes of large encyclopedia books. Like, it's a lot of information. It's the programming, if you will, for everything that your body does. And every single cell has an entire copy of the entire DNA. Every cell has a complete blueprint for how your body functions and how to create it, because your body isn't constantly recreating itself. You have new cells being formed all the time. And so every single cell has the database of the whole thing. The vast amount of information required for that to happen is still, we are just barely beginning to understand those details. Okay, let me show you another talk from the same TED Talk.
Cell looks down a light microscope, and it's been filmed under time lapse, which is why you can see it moving. The nuclear envelope breaks down. These sausage-shaped things are the chromosomes, and we'll focus on them. They go through this very striking motion that is focused on these little red spots. When the cell feels it's ready to go, it rips apart the chromosome. One set of DNA goes to one side, the other side gets the other set of DNA, identical copies of DNA, and then the cell splits down the middle. And again, you have billions of cells undergoing this process right now inside of you. Now we're going to rewind and just focus on the chromosomes and look at its structure and describe it. So again, here we are at that equator moment. The chromosomes line up, and if we isolate just one chromosome, we're going to pull it out and have a look at its structure. So this is one of the biggest molecular structures that you have, at least as far as we've discovered so far, inside of us. So this is a single chromosome, and you have two strands of DNA in each chromosome. One is bundled up into one sausage, the other strand is bundled up into the other sausage. These things that look like whiskers that are sticking out from either side are the dynamic scaffolding of the cell. They're called microtubules, but the name's not so important. But what we're going to focus on is this red region. I've labeled it red here, and it's the interface between the dynamic scaffolding and the chromosomes. It is obviously central to the movement of the chromosomes, but we have no idea really as to how it's achieving that movement. We've been studying this thing called the kinetochore for over 100 years with intense study, and we're still just beginning to discover what it's all about. It is made up of about 200 different types of proteins, thousands of proteins in total. It is a signal broadcasting system. It broadcasts through chemical signals, telling the rest of the cell when it's ready, when it feels that everything is aligned and ready to go for the separation of the chromosomes. It is able to couple onto the growing and shrinking microtubules. It's transiently, it's involved with the growing of the microtubules, and it's able to transiently couple onto them. It's also a tension sensing system. It's able to feel when the cell is ready, when the chromosome is correctly positioned. It's turning green here because it feels that everything is just right. And you'll see that there's one little last bit that's still remaining red. And it's walked away down the microtubules. That is the signal broadcasting system sending out the stop signal, and it's walked away. I mean, it's that mechanical. It's molecular clockwork. This is how you work at the molecular scale. So with a little bit of molecular eye candy, we've got kinesins, which are the orange ones. They're little molecular courier molecules walking one way. And here are the dynein. They're carrying that broadcasting system, and they've got their long legs so they can step around obstacles and so on. So again, this is all derived accurately from the science. The problem is we can't show it to you any other way.
Okay, so he's not speaking super precisely in there. Like, you don't have robots walking inside of you. All you sci-fi folks, relax for a second. There's no robots, but it sure does look like it. And those are small little proteins that are walking along. It's showing you at a atom by atom, molecule by molecule level. If you zoom into those details, your body's using incredibly sophisticated proteins and enzymes with very, very sophisticated geometry that has mechanical functions. Right? That's transmitting things from one part of your cell to another part of the cell. All of it's happening at a level that we cannot see, but people have been able to deduce these bits and pieces. And so it's like, this is not, he's describing like, hey, we've done all the science, and we've tried to put together all the pieces, and they've seen it, but we can't see it. It's so fine. It's so detailed. And it's so fascinating as you start looking at how all these systems work, all the nuances of your body. It is almost incomprehendibly complex. Almost incomprehendibly complex. One of the ones that got my attention this week as I was looking at some of these videos was this third one here, which is, again, a third machine that your body uses to generate the ATP. It's the molecule that fuels your whole body. One last one.
Deep inside your mitochondria, rows of molecular motors generate ATP, the molecule essential to all life on Earth. Enzymes bring together reactants to form a chemical bond, converting mechanical energy into chemical energy. A ring of enzymes work in step, creating 3 molecules of ATP with each cycle. Inside the molecular motor, a rotating axle powers the sequence. The axle is attached to a rotary molecular motor, moved by the force of protons, pushing from the other side of the membrane. A difference in proton concentration propels the molecular mechanism. Synthesis of ATP.
Okay, the music is a little dramatic. I apologize. Again, I didn't pick it, right? But I hope you can notice the language they're using. There's a motor, and this is in a mitochondria, like this is in every single cell of your body. It's not just chemistry, but it's actually, if you catch what they said converting physical energy or into chemical energy. It's actually smushing these molecules together to bend them into shape and to attach the phosphate to make it into ATP, but it is a physical process that's driven by these little motors. There's a total of 5 enzymes or complexes of these mechanical motors, some that's pumping the protons into the core to then drive these motors, but there's a level of complexity that most of us are completely unaware of. And the truth is that we we have these motors working inside of us that drives the very energy that for everything our bodies do is all driven by ATP. And so when we eat food and we breathe in oxygen, those go into our bodies and our cells process those, and those drive these motors. And it is literally like clockwork motors inside you. Okay, so this question, right, again, the very beginning, is humanity closer to the rock or a watch? To me, it's pretty straightforward. If we think about Paley's Originals argument, which was written way before Darwin, it comes into such a new perspective as we've learned more and more biology. As we learn more about the nature of how our bodies function, he could have never imagined that we were working like clockwork, but yet he used this illustration. And it's very interesting as people learn these things, as you become aware of these realities, we have a choice about how we answer it, or how we deal with it. Two prominent scientists both have studied this subject in a lot of detail. Richard Dawkins, you may have heard of him, is a very famous atheist. He says, hey, we are like the rock. Hey, those machines, that's all natural processes, natural selection drives all of that. He's very famous. He was a zoologist who he grew up Anglican, left his faith, says, hey, it's all just chance. It's all just Darwin. Whereas the other guy, Francis Collin over here, he was the head of the Human Genome Project that mapped out human DNA, discovered many genetic disorders as well as doing that. He grew up as an agnostic, but became a believer, right? Studied physical chemistry, PhD at Yale, and so on and so forth. So all of us, when we look at the evidence, and both these guys are much more familiar with it than you and I are, when we see the evidence, we have a choice of what we're going to do with it. We have a choice to decide, hey, what's the cause of all this? And it's a faith decision on both sides. Sometimes I hear folks say, hey, well, that's you can hold on to faith, I hold on to something. Like, no. It's all a faith decision. And you have a choice, though, which way, what are you going to conclude about the basics? Are we on purpose or are we an accident? And again, I'm not advocating for either their perspectives or their theologies, but we all have to answer this question for ourselves. Are we like that rock, or are we like a watch? Is there an intelligence behind why we are the way we are, and were we designed? Right? We have to look at creation and observe these things. We have to look at our humanity and decide for ourselves, which is it? But I hope you'll join me and the psalmist in recognizing the truth of what God has done. This is what David writes. He says, "For you created me in my innermost parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you because I am awesomely or fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well." Knows it very well. Couple. What do you do with all this here in 2023? Couple things. We view God as an artist. We view God as a creator. Next week, we're going to look at God as an author. But what do we do with this knowledge? As we learn more about the world all around us, how it functions, who God is, what do we do with all this? And my first encouragement, my first challenge to you is very simply this, that if you see the design, meet the designer. If you look out there, if you see the design, meet the designer. His name is Jesus. Right? That is where it comes from. And we can learn, we can meet Jesus, we can learn more about him. The easiest way, it's written out for us. It's in the Bible. If you're here and you have not read the Bible, let me encourage you to grab a Bible, read it. I encourage people to start in the book of John. If you don't have a Bible, there's gazillions of them on the internet, but we have paper copies in the back. You're welcome to take one home free of charge. But dig in and meet Jesus. There is a designer. Number two, if you know the Lord, join me in praising God because we are wonderfully made. And the more we learn, the more we should want to praise God because we are a living, walking, breathing miracle. There's some other books. If you're interested in this topic, would like to do some reading, I have some other books I would suggest. There's some really interesting science arguments against the traditional perspective. One is very, very basic. How I don't know how chemistry works in general. Things go from crazy or order to disorder. It's called the second law of thermodynamics. It's what causes us to be able to create air conditioners and heat pumps and things like that. But that principle, if you apply it to biology, would say that biology is taught in public school isn't possible because of information doesn't increase, information decreases. There's losses, not increases. And so several fascinating science articles. If you're a person who'd like to study more of those, come visit with me. I also have a book that's always in the back called Discovering God that looks at some various evidences from a science perspective about the nature of God. Okay? So one last thing for next week. We are going to do the final segment called The Story That Matters. So a couple weeks ago here, we kicked things off with the art. This morning, we looked at the design. The third bit of artistry that God creates is the written word. All right, it's literature. And it's a beautiful bit of artwork. The scriptures, the Bible is the most translated, the most best published book of all time by several orders of magnitude. And there is significance to it. And the truth is that most of us haven't really even read the whole thing. And you start in the beginning and then you stop reading and you don't get to the end and you miss the big ideas. And so what we're going to do next week is we're going to survey the entire Bible in 30 minutes and look at the I don't know, it's a big task, but we're going to try to see the big picture, if you will, the meta-narrative, if you're a literary person, the big idea of the entire Bible synthesized in one session so that you can walk away knowing, hey, this is what the Bible is really all about. And so I encourage you to come back and join us for that. If you're tired of the science, you can know that it's done, but we're going to finish doing this story that matters next week. Also want to encourage you that Christmas Eve has come up. We have 2 services for Christmas Eve, 9 and 10:30. Would love to have you join us. We'll be doing candlelight as well as just a chance to celebrate Christmas.